Madam Speaker.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Honourable Tinetti.
Madam Speaker, I hope lots of people go back and watch that speech because that was a ramble from way back and made absolutely no sense whatsoever. Madam Speaker, today is a sad day for public education, a very, very sad day in New Zealand because it's a day when the National-led government has put politics before education. It's put it before our learners, it's put it before our children. And Madam Speaker, here we go again. And I say here we go again because I've just opened with exactly the same words that the Right Honourable Chris Hipkins opened with in his speech in the third reading of the Education Amendment Bill in 2013. And this is like a treadmill. We are putting ideology ahead of our children here today. Madam Speaker, this is worse than 2013, Madam Speaker, because not only today have we got the introduction back of charter schools, we also have the repeal of the network planning as part of the early learning network in this country. How sad is that? The Early Learning Network Planning was part of the Early Learning Action Plan, Madam Speaker, and I hold that here because this is a well-respected document, not only here in New Zealand but across the world. It was worked out with experts, it was worked out not only with our teaching workforce but also with all of the peak body groups, it was worked out with academics of what was going to make the biggest difference for our early learning sector, Madam Speaker. Objective 5 is about the network planning, and part of that objective and part of the network planning was to give it time to bed in and to give it time to see the difference that it was making. Not even a year goes by and the Minister's repealing it. Why is he repealing it? He's repealing it because the business model people that want to run their businesses in early childhood see that they're having their business models being hampered by the network planning. We're not putting kids at the centre. The Minister, how embarrassing. How embarrassing for our early childhood network in this country that he is talking about Russia and business in Russia. We're not talking about coffee beans. We're not talking about inanimate objects here. We're talking about children's education. How can that be acceptable that we have an Associate Minister who likens kids' education to economic studies and economic philosophy around the world? That is embarrassing for this country, Madam Speaker, and very embarrassing for the members of the coalition government, I am sure. Today, with the repeal of that, we put our community-based centres back at risk. We put our Pacific Learning Nests, our Punareo, our Kohanga Reo back at risk. And the Minister's response? Oh, well, in Russia, when they tried to stop businesses starting, in Russia, when we're trying to stop businesses starting, it didn't work. Again, I say, we're not talking about inanimate objects. We're talking about children and their learning. Now let's get on to the charter schools, an absolutely horrific ideological experiment that has failed in this country in many ways once before. Now I'm not saying that there weren't some individual successes, but overall, charter schools absolutely failed. And here we go, we're hearing I've never visited them. Oh yes, I did, Minister. I absolutely visited some of those charter schools. Have you visited all of them, Minister? I ask you that, because that is not right either. Here we go. We're just going to get in there and say, oh, she hasn't visited them. That is absolutely wrong. Yeah, quiet now, you're absolutely right. It is an ideological experiment that absolutely failed. Did you visit the ones that failed, that put kids at risk, that we heard about? No. That's a no. That's an absolute no, because that didn't happen. The mai that happened, that we heard about in Select Committee, the absolutely horrificness, Madam Speaker, that happened for some of those kids. And why is it such a bad thing? Because we're using profit and profit-making enterprise to withdraw money from the public education system. And there it is, not putting kids at the centre. And that side over there, Madam Speaker, thinks that that's okay. That's great that they think that's okay, because when we see the failure this time and the hurt that will happen to some of those kids, that will be on their heads, Madam Speaker. That will be on their heads. And it's causing a distraction, Madam Speaker, saying, oh, look, it creates choice and flexibility. But what we do know about education, Madam Speaker, in this country is that when we devolve in education even further, we create greater inequities. And what we have seen overseas, with the research that has been seen around charter schools, inequity has become even greater, Madam Speaker. We have seen that time and time again. But we will hear from them about research that they will quote, that they will say, oh no, the Credo research says that. That has already been discredited because of its inability to have a peer review and the fact that it was funded by pro-charter school proponents. So why would the other side only go to that research? Because there isn't any other research that shows that this is a good thing. It shows that we are going to be devolving this education sector even further. But let's go to the real reason here, because we heard it from the Minister's speech there just now. This is about busting our teaching unions. In fact, last week when we were talking about this in the House, we had a member from the other side, I think it was Simon Court, yelled out, we don't care about unions, we only care about kids. Well, I can tell you from experience, Madam Speaker, that the people that become involved in the teaching unions become involved because they want the best for kids. They know that those unions want the absolute best. Oh, here we go. Doesn't that trigger them? Every single time, that triggers them. Say that word union. But if I said taxpayers union, does that trigger you in the same way? No, it doesn't. They, Madam Speaker, are incredibly triggered by unions. They do not care about conditions for teachers, which means that they do not care about conditions for kids. Because, Madam Speaker, teacher conditions and educator conditions are our kids' conditions. The reason, as I said, that people become involved in the unions is to ensure that they are getting the very best deal for their kids. Madam Speaker, I was involved in the National Executive NZDI Te Aroha. I did not do that for my own self or for my colleagues. I did it because I knew that we could get a better deal for our kids and that we had a strong strong organisation that could advocate for the best for kids. We talked to academics, we talked to people in the know about what was the best. I put it out there, Madam Speaker, that what does the other side do in that? They don't want to put children at the centre of what they're talking about here, as otherwise they wouldn't be going down this track. Madam Speaker, there has been overwhelming public opposition to this bill. 90.3% of submitters were opposed to charter schools. Madam Speaker, and here we have the other side, just proving my point. Mr McCallum talking about it being a union campaign, completely proving my point. Please keep speaking with your interjections, because you are going so far, Mr McCallum, in speaking exactly to my point, that they are triggered by something that they should not be triggered about. They are absolutely making this about busting those teacher unions. Madam Speaker, the reason why is because we have got such a strong body there that put our kids at the centre. Because I go back to say, Madam Speaker, that the people that work so hard in those organisations know that if they get it right for the educators, they get it right for the kids. I go back to that comment, and let's just put this into context. I go back to that comment that was made by that member last week saying we don't care about unions, we care about kids. I understand that that member was a civil engineer before he came into politics. That's like saying we don't care about the engineers, we only care about the bridges. Imagine if we did that, Madam Speaker, we'd have all our infrastructure falling over. These people have no idea of the importance of what our unions bring, but having said that, that means they have no regard for our teachers whatsoever. Madam Speaker, this has been a rushed process. Even now, Madam Speaker, we have to finish this off under urgency. Why do we have to finish it off under urgency? Because the arguments against this were so strong that it was taken so long that the Minister knew that he had to finish it under urgency. He gave it a rushed process, a short and select committee, not giving people the opportunity to have their say. It is going to be starting next year. Next year is rushing it. This is going to have so many problems, Madam Speaker. We've seen it. We know we're going to have it back in the House to tidy up this bill, because we've identified the sloppiness. We've identified where the issues are. Madam Speaker, this is, I go back to how I started, this is a sad, sad day for New Zealand public education.
I think we're going to be having a couple of springs pop out of the clutch plate.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could hear from Jan that she covered a lot of really good points there, but I think possibly the most interesting point was around how this is potentially the main point of the reform is around busting the teacher unions. And I think if we go back to 1991, when maybe, I'm not sure how many people on this call were alive back then.
I was.
You
I was 1 year old.
Yeah, I was. I would have been. Yeah, I was a 1990 baby. So
I was not old enough to join a union.
Very good, but
I was not old enough to go to kindergarten.
But no. I mean, the whole point of the Employment Contracts Act was very, very similar. It was all around busting the main unions at the time that represented workers, and I think Jan just made that point very clearly that charter schools could have the very same point. And I think if that's the case, then that's very sad, because I when I was in the classroom, I didn't meet a teacher that wasn't passionate about the kids. And and I think if you make an argument that's on the other side of that, then I think you don't understand teachers, because every single teacher I've worked with, every single teacher I know is passionate about the kids. And if you're not about supporting teachers, then really you're not about supporting kids. And it's a very unusual argument to make. But fantastic arguments from Jan.
It's pretty obvious that this coalition has really got a hard on for busting unions. I mean,
yeah. I mean, what are they expecting? What do you call it? You know, like the whole point of unions is that you can sit down there and you know what works, you know what doesn't work. You know, oh, I'm sorry, you're a bad teacher with 30 dyslexic children, but they didn't comply in a test format that doesn't work for people with dyslexia, so you're fired. Is that what they want? Was it Superintendent Chalmers using the Simpsons reference there to go, sorry, you're fired because you had 30 dyslexic students that didn't have grade improvements in a non-dyslexic curriculum that doesn't work for them?
Yeah, I mean, why should the government take responsibility when you can blame teachers?
This does
Or in the case of charter schools, non-teachers, because ultimately they're going to have people who are not qualified and have no teaching qualifications, or just basically anyone on the street that they pull in and put
and I wonder how
That's
many
a great
of them
justification to underpay people.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I wonder how many of them would be criminals who have just been released from the local prison on a preventative detention sentence for for a sex crime.
If I
God,
could
I dread
propose
to
a
think.
counterfactual, what a lot of people on the right and libertarians seem to say is that, well, my child is homeschooled and he's taught by his mother, and his mother isn't a qualified teacher, and she is the best teacher for my child. What would you say to that then?
Oh, I was a child that was homeschooled. And I saw mixed results from other parents. I mean, you can have the best parent in the world. I was very lucky to have an educated mother and an educated father. I can't say the same for other kids. The
Right.
outcome of their education has not been the greatest. So
I
it's all
wouldn't
very
shoot
depending on the
that-
parent.
I wouldn't necessarily shoot it down, but yeah, I've seen two different areas of it. I've seen probably more positive cases, but that's possibly who I've been in circles with.
Right.
I've not seen, but I've seen a couple where I've said, "Oh, I pulled my kid out of school because of the vaccination stuff," and I'm thinking like,
Yeah.
I know you're not really kitted out for homeschooling, and I mean, knowing what I know now, that probably wasn't the right decision. But that is on a case-by-case basis on every single issue, and there could be all sorts of different reasons why some people are homeschooled. I know one person who her two oldest were schooled properly, but because her third one was autistic with was it wheelchair, a myriad of problems, it got to the point where it was easier to homeschool than send them to the was it Miramar Central School to be locked in that cupboard.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So, you know, there are different things there. And so those sorts of things there can sit there and do it. I do believe, however, that son will go to college when he hits that point, which is round about, it might be next year. It's very, very close to it. So, yeah.